Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Arcade, submitted by Steve G. Growing up in the 80s, arcades were a big thing in my town. We had two at a local mall, one standalone place that also had pool and darts, and a putt-putt that had one, and a Chuck E. Cheese knockoff place where kids had parties. The ball pit, stupid mechanical animal band, and so on. One time, my friend Chris had his 11th birthday party there. I was excited because I knew the place had games the other places didn't, like Tron and Dragon's Lair. Really fun ones. The deal was, if you were in a party, you got a certain amount of tokens with the party you were at. Pizza and soda, and the adults would kind of hang out with each other or wander around and play a game or two while keeping an eye on the kids. I remember there was one other party for another kid going on, and it was loud and fun as we were all running around, playing games, yelling and cheering on our friends. One game I loved, and that they had at other places, was Star Wars, except this one you sat down in a box-like thing to play. I guess the idea was that it made you feel like you were actually in an X-Wing fighter. I'd played the stand-up version a lot before, but this was a lot cooler. So I was playing, and after a while I ran out of lives and was going to put another token in, when this guy came over to the side of the game and asked me if I liked playing it. I knew all about Stranger Danger, but he didn't seem crazy or whatever, and I thought he was just another dad with the other party. I said I liked it, and he asked if he could get in and watch me play. And right away I said no, and then he said if he could watch over my shoulder from outside. I said, yeah, sure, whatever, and went back to playing. When I was done, I went out on the other side of the game to find my friends, and he said, hey, hang on a second, wait. Do you have any video games at home, like an Atari? I stopped and said, yeah, I have an Atari. And he said, tell you what, I have 2 copies of this same game, and I'll give you one if you want it. Okay, before anyone judges my stupidity, you have to remember that cartridges were like $40 back then, and getting new games was a rarity. We all borrowed different ones from each other to keep from being bored. So a free game? How could I possibly pass that up? I said, wow, thanks, and he said he had it out in his car and we could go get it right then. The prospect of a new game clouded my judgment, and all I could think of was playing it. He said his car was parked in the back because when he got to the party, the front parking lot was full. So I followed him to a back door when my friend Chris came up to me and asked what was up. I told him about the free game, and the guy just smiled and nodded, and Chris said, man, that's a deal and a half. The guy looked at Chris and said, hey, if you have an Atari too, I've got other games in my car, and you can pick one out. Chris said, okay, and we started going towards the door again. But right as the guy was about to open it, my dad and another friend's dad came running over and said, where do you think you're going? And that was directed to me and Chris. Before I could answer, the guy opened the door and ran out to a car. My dad tried to run after him, but the guy got away driving out from behind the place, and I recall my dad telling the police later when he talked to them that the car didn't have any plates. Back inside, no one knew who the guy was. He wasn't with the other birthday party. He wasn't with our birthday party. He just showed up like a total pedo, looking to snatch some kids. Seriously, for all I know, he wasn't a pedo. Maybe he just wanted to kill little kids. Who knows? But what I do know is that Chris and I got our butts chewed out big time for talking to a stranger, and then thinking it was a good idea just leaving with him, and on top of it, not even telling our parents. I learned a lesson that I already knew. But even now as a 45-year-old man, I think back and see how scary that really was. A few more feet, and Chris and I could have been in pretty serious trouble with nobody knowing where we had gone. I'm glad my dad was paying attention that day. The Moaning Sound, submitted by Orange Potato. I recently experienced some paranormal stuff and some weird shit during spring break. Over spring break, I made a long trek from the Midwest all the way to Spartanburg, South Carolina to meet my relatives. I'm a fan of horror movies and other stuff like that, so I decided to look up some scary and haunted places in Spartanburg. I'm a Christian and do not believe in the paranormal, but I do, however, believe in demons that might cause mischief and trouble in the work of the devil. If you know anything about Spartanburg, you might know of the infamous Gates of Hell Cemetery. It's an old cemetery that has housed many dead, and anyway, I wanted to go there. So at night, of course, me and my brother headed to the lake. Eventually, we got there about after 5 minutes. It was night, the park was closed, but we decided to explore a bit anyway. We split up, which is always a bad idea. I know it's trespassing, but I have to say that the cat was trespassing as well. Yeah, I found a black cat that ran away when I came near its hiding spot. I walked around for a few minutes discouraged, and eventually I decided to get back towards the car. I walked over. I might mention that I am very timid and an introvert, and I also guess a bit of a scaredy cat. I'm not so much of a boy kind of boy. Anyways, I heard something rustling from the nearby forest, and I looked into the woods and saw nothing. Then I heard a noise that sounded like some kind of ghoul, like moaning. I realized immediately it was that iconic yawn of my brother. He's one of those people to make a very dramatic yawn, and he had just made it. It wasn't very scary. "Aha, very funny," I said. My brother stepped out of the woods and sighed, "Well, I wasn't really trying to be scary." As we opened the car door and got into it, we heard a low moaning sound. I'd read that a woman had supposedly been killed out there, and I knew that it was the ghost. Me and my brother looked at each other, slammed the doors, and sped out of there. Let's just say I don't really believe in the paranormal. There has to be a logical explanation, right? But I've also read that in the Gore orphanage lore, supposedly, wind hits long trucks and sends out a loud ghostly sound to the orphanage. So perhaps it was something like that. I have my doubts, as it was not very windy. It was an eerily quiet night. But perhaps that cat was significant? I mean, it ran away, but maybe it wasn't running from me. All I know is that the lake, it has some weird vibes to it, at least to strangers from faraway states. Maybe I'll do some more ghost hunting later in my home state, and if I do that, I'll certainly share more stories with you. But for now, the lake strongly discouraged me from ever going out into the night again. I was stalked by a jilted junkie hookup by KTB. This happened literally a month ago, back in February, when my boyfriend and I had decided to try out an open relationship for a little while, for various reasons. We live separately in one of the larger cities in the north of Middle America, and there's a decently sized population of college students like me to keep the gay community fresh, so I was doing pretty well for myself. One night, I was bored and scrolling through Grindr looking for an easy hookup when I got a message from a guy who was barely 800 feet away. He wasn't terrible looking, and I was a little desperate, so I agreed to go to his place. He lived quite literally down the street from me. I mean, I could see his building from my window. So I walked over, and he let me up into his apartment. We made small talk, and I mentioned where I lived. Hell, I even pointed out my window from one of the windows in the stairwell. From the first, I thought there was something off about the guy. Not necessarily bad, just different. An odd twitch in his hands when he gripped the banister. The vacancy of his eyes when he smiled. I'm not so cliché to say that he felt evil or anything like that, but I wasn't exactly surprised that, after we got to his apartment, the first thing he did was to tell his very pretty and friendly cat to say hello, and the second thing he did was walk over to the kitchen counter, grab a needle, and shoot up. I hadn't even closed the door behind me. I stood there staring, and he turned around, dropped the needle on the counter, and went, "Oh, shit, man, should have asked. You cool with that?" I am not a good Christian boy. I've broken into a church while tripping on LSD. I've had sex on a headstone back in high school, but I have my standards. So I shook my head mutely, pulled my hat back on, and opened the door to leave. The guy rushed over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Yo, I'm sorry. You don't gotta go. We don't gotta fuck. Do you want to watch Transformers 3 with me or something?" "Nope," I said bluntly, hustling away down the stairs. I bundled up my scarf against the early February chill and hurried back down the street to my apartment. He followed me downstairs, barefoot, in pajama pants and a t-shirt, until I stepped outside into the whipping winds. I turned back briefly to look after a moment, and he was still standing there in the doorway, watching me. I didn't have any premonitions of doom or weirdness. I grew up in Missouri. Junkies barely register as odd to me by this point. So I just went home and went to bed. Now, you might have guessed it, but I'd never seen this dude around the neighborhood before. Truthfully, I hadn't seen most of my neighbors because my neighborhood is an odd mixture of white-collar suburbia, college housing, and low-income housing like my paramour's building. All of that's on one street. So it didn't really register when I started seeing him more. I would leave for work in the afternoon, and he'd be on the other avenue across from my building, just strolling along. Or he'd cut across my building's parking lot like all the kids in the neighborhood did. A couple of times, I saw him walking across the campus mall. My apartment building is directly adjacent to my campus, but he'd always swerve to avoid me. Once or twice, I'd notice him in the grocery store I worked at as a barista, but it's the only one within walking distance, and he mentioned he didn't have a car. This went on for the entire month of February, and eventually, I started noticing. He'd always be walking down the street opposite of my building when I left from my work at my usual time, and he was only ever at the store when I was working. He never approached the coffee stand within the store where I worked, but he always looked at me. A couple of times I noticed him enter, look at me, pretend to shop, and then leave without buying anything. And I was starting to feel creeped out, but he hadn't done anything yet to make me feel particularly unsafe. One day late in the month, I worked an early shift. When I got off, I felt a little more crazy from lack of sleep, and I reached my place about 20 minutes before I usually leave for work. On the corner of the sidewalk opposite me was this guy. He was checking his watch over and over and looking up. I did a bit of brilliant deductive analysis and followed his gaze up to my living room window. Then I looked back down at him. He looked right at me. There was a moment of tension as we stared each other in the eyes. Like I said, this dude didn't give off any evil or dark vibes. I've met people that do. But no, what I saw in this guy's eyes and his face was much more human and much scarier. Desperation, loneliness, pain, and anger. He hurried after me. I'm 6'3" and a former sprinter, whereas he was a 5'8" junkie wearing flip-flops on ice. I made it to the first set of doors to my apartment, scanned myself in through the second, and locked them behind me. He walked through the unlocked first set, tried to open the second, tried pushing the handicap button to open them, and then gave up. "Look, man, I'm sorry," he shouted, laying a hand on the glass of the door. "Can we talk about it?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not, man. Leave me alone." Then I whirled on my heel and stomped over to the elevator. When I turned back, he was gone out into the snow. I didn't see him for a couple of weeks afterward, which is nice because my boyfriend likes to walk down the street past the dude's apartment when he stays over and needs to go smoke. One night, my boyfriend was over at my place. He'd just gone out to smoke before we went to bed, and he mentioned that he wanted me to come with him the next time he went out. "Why?" I asked, pulling him in close to me while he shivered. "It's dark and cold, and I get paranoid out there sometimes," he mumbled into my chest. "There's this creepy dude that sometimes stands on the corner across the way, and he's just staring at the building. One time he asked me for a cig, and I told him I didn't have one when I literally had one in my hand." He laughed then, kissed my chin, and then passed out. I lay there awake, troubled. When I was sure my boyfriend was deeply asleep, meaning after about 5 minutes had passed, I extricated myself and went to the window. It was a cold, clear night. and I could see across the street, under the orange glow of the streetlight, there was the guy. I couldn't make him out clearly, but when he saw me, he waved. I flicked him off and closed the blinds. I didn't feel like I should have to tell my boyfriend because he was either going to immediately go to the police, which I hate doing, or he'd try and defend me. And while I love him with my entire heart, I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to watch a fight between a junkie stalker and my underweight nicotine-addicted boyfriend. So I kept it to myself, and I still haven't told him. But I did start accompanying him when he went out to smoke. That guy was usually outside. Sometimes he'd follow us for a bit before ducking down a side street, and sometimes he'd watch from a distance, and sometimes he'd be up in his apartment. My boyfriend never noticed. I kept my composure, and nothing happened. One night, though, we went out so my boyfriend could smoke like normal. When we reached the end of the street and turned around, the stalker was behind us, maybe 50 feet back. I turned my head to check, and there he was. He waved at me again, and something told me I had to get back inside. "Hey, babe," I said quietly to my boyfriend. "Let's get back inside, yeah? I'm cold." "Aw, baby," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Okay, I'm almost done anyway." We walked back to the apartment building, and without turning, I knew that the stalker was behind us the entire time. I kept my hand intertwined with my boyfriend's, and he kept up the casual conversation we'd been having about how I hate geese. When we got back up to my apartment and he got changed for bed while I was grabbing some water. I've never lived in an apartment before, and I didn't know if it's odd or not, but this building has a weird telephone in each unit that rings when someone wants to be let in. Ours never rings unless it's Uber Eats, so my boyfriend was surprised when it started ringing late at night, when neither of us had ordered anything. "Probably just some asshole playing a prank," I said, unhooking the phone from the wall and putting it in the kitchen cabinet. He accepted that without a struggle, and we laid down in bed. When he was soundly out, I got up, got dressed, grabbed a couple of things, and headed downstairs in my thick winter coat. Sure enough, Fanboy was out there in the parking lot. He waved at me and jogged over, smiling broadly. "Hey, man!" "What do you want?" I said flatly. "Look, man, I feel like we ended things awkwardly last time. I just wanted to talk to you," he said. "So you stalked me?" "What?" He started to look angrier, his brows furrowing. "Nah, man, I didn't stalk you. I just wanted to know when I could talk to you, but you always avoid me. Now you're walking around out here with that skinny little bitch boy trying to rub it in my face, and I don't fucking appreciate that." "Look, man," he said, smiling again, stepping closer. "You want to go talk about this back at my place? Ditch the white boy and come hang out with me tonight. Please, I won't shoot up or anything this time." He took another step closer to me. I saw in his right hand a dully gleaming piece of metal, a folded-up switchblade. He smiled at me, and I stepped back, shaking my head, and his smile drained away into a deep scowl. "Bitch, I'm done asking. You're going to come over to my place now and finish what we started," he growled. He unfolded the knife and pointed it at me. Like I said, this dude was 5'8" tops and skinny. Like I said, I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, and regularly lift weights. Also, I had a 12-inch kitchen knife which I had drawn from my coat pocket and leveled at his throat. He looked at my knife and then back at his and smiled again. "All right, bro, I was just playing. We don't gotta, we can just talk right here, bro. I don't—" "Leave me and my boyfriend alone," I said very quietly. "I'll cut your face off and eat it." "What the fuck?" he said. "I spent 8 years in juvie for stabbing a kid in middle school." I lied. He backed up, putting the knife back in his pocket, and I took a step closer, holding my knife level. He backed away quickly, almost falling on the ice, until he was fully sprinting back to his place, and I was chasing him down with my knife until he crossed the street and I stopped. Slid the knife back in my pocket and watched him run back to his building. Then I went back up to my bedroom, told my boyfriend I just had to go to pee, and then fell asleep. So, nameless, horny junkie, let's not meet again, or I will eat your face. Ice Chest Cindy, submitted by Zach C. The story took place in the mid-1970s, when my mom was in her late teens. The story has stuck with me ever since my mother burnt it into my young mind. It was in the middle of August. Harvest was in full swing, really just a typical day in eastern Washington during the summer. You know, the kind when the freshly harvested wheat sends plumes of dust into the air, leaving the sun-stained, orange haze across the rolling hills. If you have allergies, living in this area wouldn't be for you. Anyway, as my mother often told us, she would spend her summers babysitting various local kids, as there wasn't much for work in a town of less than 1,200 people. Unless you were a farmer or a child of a farmer, you typically found yourself taking any side job you could find. It was a weekend day, and my mother had just finished watching these two young kids. It's been a long time since my mother has told me this story, and, well, she's since passed on. But I think the little girl she was watching was around 4 years old, and her brother was 9 or 10. She was about to leave the family's home when their mother asked if she would like to go with them to a late lunch just outside of town at a friend's house. She thought for a minute, and then the lady said, "There'll be others there from your class," and knowing this, she happily agreed and said she would meet them there. An hour or so later, she had arrived at the large farmhouse just outside of town. To give you a mental picture of the farmhouse estate, picture a standard large red barn with a couple of medium-sized shops on the property. There was a play area for the children with everything from swings to a jungle gym, and this house had a wraparound porch at the front and a smaller deck off the back. There was a large, thick dust blind on the right side of the house, and for all of those of you who are not familiar with dust blinds, they're large trees, typically poplar trees, planted side by side for hundreds of feet. They blocked the large plumes of harvest dust from completely covering every inch of the estate. On the other side of the house, it was just wheat fields for miles and miles. It had only been a few minutes when many of the children that my mom babysat spotted her. Instantly, they started in on her, pleading to play hide and seek, tag, and all those games kids like to play outside. After about all she could take, my mom said, "Fine," and with a laugh, she said, "We can play hide and seek." All the kids got big grins on their faces as they normally do, and soon the group of children ran off to go hide, parents yelling in the distance to not go too far and stay out of the shops and don't cross the road. There were about 10 kids, if I remember the story correctly, ranging in age from the youngest being 4 years old to some older kids that were just reaching their teens. My mom wasn't the oldest among the kids, however, she was extremely liked by those she babysat. I don't know why I mentioned that. I guess I miss her, and I'm always talking about how great she was. After about 30 minutes of playing hide and seek, my mom said they decided to finish their last game before their late lunch was served. It was starting to get a little colder now as the cooler late August, early September breeze started blowing in. Mom could hear other kids in the distance being found by the seeker, with the occasional child complaining that someone else helped to find them. You know how kids can be. Minutes went by, when one of the kids my mom was hiding with said, "Do you hear that?" And my mom responded, "No, could you see someone?" It was then a small hand grabbed her shoulder. She turned only to be met with an ear-to-ear smiling kid. "Found you!" a little red-headed boy yelled. I know, up to this point you're probably just thinking, what does any of this have to do with anything? I'm getting there. Everyone started making their way into the farmhouse to get ready to eat, some parents lagging behind, picking up things the children had left behind. That's when one of the teenage girls came out of the house calling for her 4-year-old sister. We'll refer to her as Cindy. "Cindy! Cindy, time to come in and eat," she yelled. After about 5 minutes of her sister yelling for her, there was still no sign of Cindy. Her sister hustled back inside and started asking everyone if they had seen her, and who was the last hiding with her before they all came inside. Nobody had a solid answer to where Cindy was. The entire group stopped eating and headed out to look for her. Everyone was yelling her name, searching in and out of all the shops on the property as well as the long tree line surrounding the farm. 15 minutes turned into 30 minutes, and then soon an hour had passed, and still there was no sign of Cindy. Then, as my teenage mother and a few others were starting up the back porch stairs to enter the house again, on the porch just next to the sliding glass door, was an ice chest. You know, like one of those old 1970s Coleman type with the metal latches. The description of that isn't important, but what is important is what was lying next to the ice chest. It was a pair of black dress shoes with the little strap that ran across the top connecting to the metal clasp. My mom remembered turning to see Cindy's uncle turn ghost white. Those were Cindy's shoes. But why were they sitting next to the ice chest, nicely together, side by side? Instantly, Cindy's uncle told my mom and the others that were on the porch to go and get the other adults. "Now!" he screamed with a sad gasp, holding his head with his hands. This is and will always be one of the most chilling parts of his story that I will ever remember. My mother, she didn't leave with the others on the porch. At this time, she knew what was in that ice chest, and she couldn't look away. Cindy's father opened the ice chest, and there, the cold, lifeless body of Cindy was exposed. Her father quickly pulled her from the airtight cooler, and he began CPR, but it was too late. She was dead. I'll never forget that day, my mom would always tell us. She was Cindy's favorite babysitter, and Cindy was my mom's favorite little one. Fast forward to the day of Cindy's funeral. It was taking place in the same town, and everyone was going to be there to support Cindy's family. My mother and her family were just leaving when my mom had to run back upstairs to get something. I don't remember exactly what she had forgotten or why she needed to go back up to her room, but this is where things got a little creepy. I'd like to inform all the listeners that this is the exact house that I would also grow up in. To paint a picture of the scene, there's a large front living room and it has a large carpeted stairway that leads upstairs. The stairway is an L shape and it goes up about halfway and then turns 90 degrees to the right. Then you have about 6 or 7 more stairs until you reach the top. To the left is the bathroom and a built-in closet. Straight ahead is a hallway about, I'd say, no longer than 10 feet. There are 2 bedrooms on the right and 1 on the end at the left. Mom's room was at the end and on the right. As she ran back upstairs to get whatever she had forgotten, she would enter her room and instantly, as she put it, be filled with this feeling that she was not alone. She grabbed whatever it was that she needed and turned out of the room. When she reached to turn the stairs, she felt this need to look back up towards the end of the hall near her room. There, in the middle of that hallway, stood Cindy, smiling. Mom froze, but not with fear as she told us that she wasn't scared. She was happy. As quickly as Cindy was there, she was gone. To this day, Cindy's tragic death has been considered accidental. They just assumed that she had hid in that ice chest during a game of hide-and-seek, that she died of asphyxiation. But why would a 4-year-old take her shoes off, set them there beside the ice chest nicely, and then climb inside? And how could a 4-year-old not have the ability to know that they were becoming short of breath and just push their way out? Was it an accident, or something more sinister? Whatever the reason, it was an extremely tragic day, and my mom never forgot that little girl. Neither will I. Cougar, submitted by 7-Eleven Teen. My name's Keith. Not really, but it is for this escapade. None of these names are the players, and my wife was even telling me not to share my story, but she doesn't listen to your channel, so here goes. I want to get this off my chest. When I was 24, about 6 years ago, I had recently broken up with my longtime girlfriend and was in that rebound stage. I'll take whatever I can get stage. Not just anyone, but you get what I'm saying. I was with some friends at a local bar playing darts, shooting stick, hitting up the jukebox, and waiting for a local band to start later that night. There was a usual gang of guys and some of their girlfriends. We were all just hanging out, having a good time. But just before the band started, this woman walked by us, in her early 40s, tight leather pants, loose top, and truth be told, she was pretty attractive. You can probably see where this is going. She stopped at me as I had just sunk a shot and said,
"Can you handle all sticks like that?"
and looked down at my pants. Of course, all my friends did the "oh man" thing, and I blushed. She walked away, heels clicking loud over the jukebox, And my friend Eric said, "Dude, come on, man, get after that." But his girlfriend Laura said, "Shut up, that's gross." Everybody laughed. In a little bit, the band started up and I went to get a beer at the bar. As I was waiting and jostling for a spot at the bar, 2 guys left. So I zipped in, and so did you-know-who. The bartender pointed to me, and I said, "Just a draft." He pointed at her, and she said,
Long Island iced tea.
and he said, "Okay, draft, and a vodka tea." And she said,
No, a Long Island iced tea.
He shook his head and said, "Lady, those are a pain in the ass to make, and there's a lot of people here tonight." She waved a 50 at him, and he just nodded and got to work. And then I shit you not, she then looked at me, licked her lips, and said,
I always get what I want.
and she put her hand on mine. Okay, horny 24-year-old penis overrode smart 24-year-old brain. We started talking, and when we got our drinks, we left the bar area and then went back away from the stage. Another one of my friends saw me and gave me the thumbs up with a big shit-eating grin. And before I could say anything, she said,
My name is Karen, and I want to dance, right now, with you.
Well, again, you can see where this is going. She invited me back to her place right then, and like an idiot, I said okay. I texted Eric I was leaving and that I'd call him tomorrow. She held my hand and led me to a BMW M5, and I knew this woman had to have money. We drove to her townhouse, and I won't go into details, but yes, we had sex. Before we fell asleep after a few hours of fooling around, she whispered,
I always get what I want.
The next morning, she drove me to my apartment building, and before I got out, she said,
Dinner tonight at 6. I'll pick you up.
I was just supposed to hang out with the guys to watch Hockey Night in Canada like we usually did. That's when I told her I said I had plans. She put her finger to my lips and said,
I'll pick you up a little before 6.
Where was I a little before 6? Outside my building, waiting for her. Okay, I get it. So far, this isn't creepy or scary, I know. Here's where things start to go there quick. Over the next 2 months, we had a lot of sex. There was never a ton of conversation, just hookups at her place, my place, a few hotels, whatever. But we never really talked about our personal lives. I did find out she was divorced with no kids and had really taken her husband to the cleaners in the settlement. He was some investor guy that made a boatload and had moved to New York City right after the divorce. But anyway, one day, everything just stopped. No more calls, no texts, no late-night booty hookups. Karen just went away. I figured, well, she's on to someone else. Whatever. That sure was fun. About a month after that, I met a really nice woman I'll call Jen. We met at a fundraiser and hit it off immediately. She was, and is, beautiful, smart, driven, and sexy as hell. We started dating not long after we met, and here's where shit goes off the rails. About a month into our new and wonderful relationship, Karen came back. We happened to be at the same place I mentioned in the beginning, and it was just me and Jen playing darts waiting for friends for dinner. In came Karen in a red leather dress, looked right at us, and then sat down at the bar. After about 20 minutes and some of our other friends showing up, Karen walked right up to me and said, "Is this your little girlfriend?" Jen was taken aback, and I grabbed her hand and said, "Yeah, I think you need to walk away." Karen then grabbed my crotch, and before I could say or do anything, she looked right at Jen and said,
This is mine whenever I want it.
and then she just walked out the door. As you can imagine, that was awkward as hell. I had told Jen I had messed around with an older woman, and even gotten tested so she wouldn't be weirded out by it. Jen said she didn't care. She'd also had a fling with an older guy. But what happened right then was nuts. After things calmed down and the whole group finally showed up, we all left to go to dinner. There were 6 of us, and after we sat down and ordered, a bottle of wine showed up at our table. The waiter looked like he didn't want to give it to us, but he said it was compliments of a woman, and on the bottle in red lipstick was the word slut. I immediately scanned the room. And there she was at the bar. Karen. She was staring at me, winked, then got up and left. I mean, no one knew what to say. But Eric, always the easygoing guy, just grabbed a napkin, wiped the word away, and said, "Hey, fuck it, free wine." And everybody laughed and relaxed a little. The rest of the night was cool. Then the phone calls started. Outside of my day job, at the time I was running a website selling vintage electronics, mostly stereo equipment. I also used eBay and some other outlets, but I had a separate cell phone for this. Karen was busy sending messages at all hours of the day to that phone and my normal iPhone.
Is that slut there? I'm coming over and I'm going to teach you a lesson. Don't ignore me, Keith. You know she can't give you what I can't. If you don't call me, I'll come to you.
The one that really got to me, though?
Maybe that little slut can watch the video I have of us. Thinks she'd like to see me putting you through the paces.
Videos? I had no idea she was doing that. I mean, I'm not a prude, but knowing someone you can't trust that is in possession of you doing the deed is scary. And out of context, that stuff can be used to get people in trouble in more ways than one, I assure you. I immediately told Jen everything, and then one day, she played some messages for me. Somehow Karen had gotten her number and also knew where she worked. On the same day Karen had called Jen's boss and left a voicemail saying all kinds of terrible things about her, she left another on her cell phone saying,
"You little slut bitch whore, dump him now."
Yeah, things were getting creepy and intense. That weekend I went into the local supermarket, grabbing some veggies. A cart banged into mine. Karen. I told her to leave me alone, and if I got one more message, I was going to the cops. She just laughed and walked away. 2 aisles later, bang! She banged into my cart again and said,
"I'm not going anywhere, sweetie. I wonder how many people online would like to see us in the sheets."
I didn't say a word, walked away, went around an aisle, and then just left my cart there and beelined it to my car. I called the cops and explained my situation, and they said other than issuing her a warning, there wasn't anything they could do if she had just stopped immediately. I said, "Do what you have to do, I'm tired of this." I gave them her information, and then asked if they would just follow up with me. Of course, Jen was annoyed and also scared. I mean, neither of us knew what this woman was capable of. I got the last phone message the next day that said,
So you went to the police. Glad one of our fun little videos was playing when they came to talk to me? Your head buried between my legs?
That was it. I hadn't heard from the cops, so I called them back. I played the message, and they told me to come out and fill out forms to serve her papers, that she could not be within 500 feet of me or contact me in any way. I did go down and fill out the forms, had a lawyer look at them, and filed it that day. Everything stopped. For a while. But then it happened. Jen was coming home from work and was about to enter her duplex. She shared with a friend. They had a detached garage, and as she was walking to their back door, Karen came out of nowhere and attacked her, trying to drag her behind the garage. There was nothing but fields and trees behind it, but Jen was able to scream for help. Her roommate, thank God, was home, called the cops, came running out to see the two fighting on the grass, and she tried to jump in, and for a few minutes the fight kept on. Thankfully, within 5 minutes a cop showed up. He broke everything up and started getting the story. Karen had a bag behind the garage with zip ties, duct tape, a ball gag, a thick collar and a leash, and handcuffs. She was going to try to kidnap Jen to get to me. She quickly found out that that kind of thing is a serious felony, and to suffice it to say, she lost a whole lot in the process of the trial and her conviction. She lost her job, her townhouse, her cars, yes, she had more than one, and just about everything else. Karen was sentenced to 4 years in jail, and I was sure that was the last we would see of her. Nope. 2 years ago, Jen and I, who were by that time engaged, were at a restaurant having dinner discussing our wedding plans. I looked up at the bar, and there she was, Karen, talking to another guy around my age. They both got up and left, and I just shook my head. I wanted so badly to run out and warn that guy, but by that time they were gone, and Jen said to just mind your own business. I hope that poor bastard got away from her fast. So yeah, to Karen, you've got a lot of problems. I understand that. You need to fix it. And stay the hell away from us. Soviet Sanitarium by Derek. Moving into our new downtown high-rise flat was a serious pain. Seriously. It took over a month from the time we purchased the apartment to when we could even start moving our belongings in. Then, we had to wait several more weeks for specific fixtures to arrive and get installed. The city was obviously experiencing a boom from new trade with China and Japan, and the housing growth was far exceeding the city's construction industry's capacity. The winter had been particularly cold as well, and although we were now in March, there was no sign the freezing temperatures and snow intended to abate. Babushka had also fallen ill with a particularly nasty bug, an even more nasty cure, which, of course, thanks to her superstitious upbringing, meant she had to try all manner of strange, horrible-smelling salves and potions. Ludya took a small break from work to stay with her grandmother and help her during recovery. The memory of what I saw in her bedroom over the New Year holidays never fully left the back of my mind, however. Every time I'd make my way into her room to say hello or bring her a bowl of soup, I'd expect some presence to be felt or some object to move. I refused to be left alone in that house again. Once the stress of the move had abated and we were successfully moved into our new home, work began to take on a much more structured and orderly pace, and our lives at last started to stabilize. It was time for my girlfriend and I to begin our adventure together. The first places we wanted to see were some of the former Soviet republics which could not be found along the country's southern and western borders. Nations which, although freed in the early 1990s, never seemed to thrive in the same way that Russia proper had. Once the winter's icy grip had finally started to thaw around late May, we flew from Vladivostok to Chelyabinsk, far away in the Caucasus, and from there rented a car to drive to the border with Kazakhstan. The road was in excellent condition, as this was obviously a vital trade route, and we purred along nicely in our rented Chevy Cruze. Honestly, I probably would have preferred a good old Soviet-era Lada to get more of the experience, but for whatever reason, none were to be had. At the border, we got quite a few stares from the security patrols and border police on both sides. It was obvious that very few tourists or even European Russians passed through this crossing. The region was populated with almost entirely native Tatar, Kazakh, and Bashkir people. Notwithstanding the curious questions and glances, a few passport scans, and a check for fruits and vegetables, we were on our way south again, now in Kazakhstan. The first stop on our journey was to an abandoned sanitarium. When you hear the term sanitarium, you're probably most likely thinking of a privately run asylum, or perhaps a place where people with chronic illnesses would go to hopefully recover. However, in Europe and these Eurasian countries, they often had a very different use. They were simply locations where local citizens could go on a short vacation. It was just an escape from the stresses of the major industrial cities to just relax. They usually included a lot of steam rooms, pools, tennis courts, and maybe a small football pitch. They were paid for by the workers' government-backed jobs, or were simply free in many cases, and were considered an essential part of a person's work year. With the fall of the Soviet Union, most of these places weren't bought up by private companies, and the government in most of these ex-satellite nations couldn't afford to maintain them. They were allowed to rot, and in some cases were filled with refugees from one post-Soviet war or another. This sanitarium we went to, it appeared, was simply allowed to die a slow death. The grounds were secured, though in typical style, and that really only meant a chain and a padlock, both of which were long gone by the time we arrived. The white stucco facade and traditional Soviet Romanesque design was broken and scarred, with large cracks exposing the concrete and rebar skeleton within. Virtually every window had been broken out, most likely by area kids who had also taken it upon themselves to cover every inch of the interior walls with graffiti. The The building had obviously been vandalized as well, following the fall, as most of the ornamental hammer and sickle emblems had been intentionally chiseled off the walls, and we come across the occasional bust of Stalin or Lenin with the face broken away. Moving down into the lower levels, we came across the Great Theater, massive and paneled in false marble. This auditorium could have probably fit at least 2,000 people in its heyday. Now it sat, silent and crumbling. Long, tattered, mold-covered velvet curtains hung precariously on either side of the performance stage, and the stage itself had more broken than intact boards, and several of the heavy projector lights had fallen from their perches from the rigging above. Those punctured through the mossy stage like cannonball scars. And just to the right of the stage stood a tall, multi-paneled window which, as with the others in the building, was entirely devoid of glass. As the faint sunlight filtered through, forming long rays in the swirling dust and mold spores, my girlfriend spotted what appeared to be an outline of a man, standing just to the side of the window frame. She tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned to look at what she was motioning to, and I caught a glimpse of the man myself. Calling out to him in Russian, we tried to get his attention, thinking at the time he was simply a local exploring too. "Privet!" "Hey," I called up to the form. With no answer, I called up again, more formally this time. "Dobry den!" "Good day." Still, there was no reply. For a moment, we wondered if this was perhaps a security guard and that we were trespassing. The figure was rather clear in his position, just beside the window, standing outside and looking down at us from perhaps 12 meters up on the wall. I asked my girlfriend to wait right there a minute. Then I stepped back to the entrance of the theater and made my way quickly around the corner of the building, to the exterior wall adjacent to where the window stood. Pulling my mobile phone from my pocket along with my passport, in case it was security, I quickly made my way up to the point where the man was standing. I stopped in my tracks as I found a sheer wall. There was no place for a man or anything to be standing at the exterior of the building outside that window. There was no balcony, no bridge, no walkway. Not only was there nowhere to stand, but there was no man there. Tapping my girlfriend's number into my phone, I placed a call and waited anxiously while it rang. "Hello?" she answered softly. "Is the man still standing there?" I asked, trying not to give away the surprise and adrenaline in my voice. "Yeah, he's still standing there staring at me." I quickly explained that he could not be standing there and why, the explanation causing her to ask me to stop and slow down several times. And when it finally dawned on her what I was saying, she cursed softly into the phone and took off running toward the entrance. I also took off, closing the gap between us as quickly as I could. When I saw her there, emerging from the Grand Theater's gaping entrance, she was pale and shivering. We grabbed each other and both made our way back around to the exterior wall. We both knew what we'd find when we arrived, but something in our minds made us need to verify it to ourselves. As expected, there was only the sheer wall, a broken window, and no man there waiting when we reached the spot again. We discussed what had happened at length, verifying with each other that we had indeed both seen what we had thought we had seen. When we were both convinced that neither of us were insane, we pressed on back toward the larger of the buildings on the old Sanitarium campus. This building had obviously been the old administrative wing. It contained staff housing, offices, meeting space, and a lot of what looked to be rather official documents scattered all over the floor of several of the first-floor rooms. The doors had been completely removed from the hinges and taken, probably made from a valuable metal or containing ornate carvings. They were probably prizes too valuable to leave behind, as was often with the case with these abandoned structures. The treasures were immediately looted in the early 90s. One of the massive filing rooms contained what had to be 400 individual filing cabinets, lining both sides of a massive rectangular room. Between the rows of cabinets sat a dozen long tables with piles of old documents scattered all over. The roof had long failed, causing rain and snow to penetrate the room and turn these papers to mush, mixed with mold and grasses struggling to grow in a random scattering of penetrating sunbeams. Upon entering this room, both of us had an intense feeling of unease. There was definitely the sense that someone was watching us, though we were obviously the only two people in the room. Using our high-powered LED flashlights, we scoured every nook and cranny of the room, and the only people there were the two of us. The deeper into the records room, the harsher the sensation felt, until it was almost one of resentment and even loathing. Calling out to this unseen energy, I tried to determine what it was and what it wanted. Again, in Russian, I spoke out. Privet! Koti! Who are you? Vikoti! Shtobi mi ushli! Do you want us to leave? We stood there in silence as my questions echoed through the room, our flashlights cutting beams of white light through the dark angular space. And suddenly, without warning, we noticed movement at the far end of the room. A large portrait of what looked to be a Soviet official detached from its mount at the top of the frame, swung forward and crashed down on a stack of rolling desk chairs which were piled on the floor just in front of it. The force of the crash sent several of the chairs careening off in different directions, and the rotten frame and canvas of the portrait cracked into several pieces. It filled the room with an ear-shattering crash and the squeaking of the rusty chair wheels. Suffice it to say, that was enough of an experience for the both of us, and we quickly and efficiently made our way back to the rental car. A couple of minutes later, we were back on the road to where we would stay for the night. I would say sleep, but neither of us got much sleep that night. I apologize for all my Russian translations, and if you are from Russia or you have that kind of background, please forgive me if I completely screwed it up. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. Special thanks to Mahala for providing a little bit of a voiceover in the story about the Cougar. If you have a true scary story you'd like to hear narrated on my channel, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. If you also are trying to save on bandwidth, you can find my stories on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. I hope all of you are well. I'm looking forward to more of your stories, and I'm looking forward to sharing them. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. Hey gang, this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories is brought to you by 3D Comics in Lancaster, New York. If you're a serious comic book collector, just starting out your collection, or maybe you're just a casual reader, then you have to check out 3D Comics in Lancaster, New York. From graded comics, custom art lithographs, limited edition prints and statues, 3D Comics is a must-see for the serious enthusiast, but the laid-back atmosphere is perfect for anyone with a love for comic books and more. They also specialize in custom art Funko Pops, taking regular Funko Pops and having a team of artists do original art on the boxes. Each comes with a certificate of authenticity. Located at 32 Central Ave in the heart of the village of historic Lancaster, New York, 3D Comics is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 6, with special appointments available on Sundays. Find them online at 3dcomicsandmore.com. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. And if you prefer to shop online, owner Joel Sharmani has tons of items available on eBay. Find a quick link to that on the shop's homepage. They also feature in-store appearances from today's hottest artists, special offers, and every Wednesday is New Comic Book Day. Give them a call at 716-860-7837, visit them online right now at 3dcomicsandmore.com, or better yet, just stop on in. But no matter where you are around the round world, 3D Comics is your destination for the best in comic books, custom art, and beyond. 3D Comics and More. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. Tell them Uncle Josh sent you.